Welcome to Miss Scarlett. Subscribe and don't miss out on Patreon. Have fun! The science fair bustled with activity. In the far corner, away from the main hubbub, a figure stood motionless before a mirror propped against the wall. Hands smoothed down the front of a floral sundress, tugging at the hem that fell just above the knees. A deep breath expanded the chest, followed by a slow exhale that carried a mix of anticipation and trepidation. "You've got this," came the whisper, barely audible above the din. "It's all for science." The reflection showed a face framed by shoulder-length brown hair, carefully applied makeup accentuating features that seemed both familiar and foreign. For a moment, Reuben studied the image of Maya staring back at him, marveling at the transformation. A loud crash from across the room broke the spell. Reuben, no, Maya now, turned away from the mirror, heart pounding. This was it. The experiment had begun. With tentative steps that grew more confident with each click of borrowed heels against the linoleum floor, Maya made her way to her assigned booth. The tri-fold display board proclaimed, "The Lens of Identity, a study in self-perception and social interaction," in bold letters. Beneath it, neatly arranged pamphlets and a tablet waited for the flood of data about to pour in. "Oh my gosh, I love your dress!" The exclamation came from Jessie, whose booth on sustainable energy stood next to Maya's. Jessie's eyes widened as she took in the sight before her, a flicker of recognition quickly masked by confusion. "Thanks," Maya replied, pitching her voice slightly higher than usual. "I wasn't sure about the pattern, but I'm glad you like it." Jessie tilted her head, brow furrowed. "I'm sorry, have we met before? You look so familiar, but I can't quite place you." A thrill of excitement coursed through Maya. The disguise was working, at least partially. She smiled, careful not to overdo it. "I don't think so. I'm Maya. I'm new here, just transferred last week." "Oh, well, welcome to Jefferson High. I'm Jessie." She extended a hand, which Maya shook, noting the firm grip. "Your project looks interesting. What's it about?" Maya launched into her prepared explanation, watching Jessie's reactions carefully. "I'm exploring how our perception of self influences the way we interact with others, and vice versa. It's fascinating how small changes in appearance or behavior can completely alter social dynamics." Jessie nodded, her interest clearly piqued. "That does sound cool. So, how are you collecting data?" "I'm using a combination of surveys, observation, and real-time interaction analysis," Maya explained, gesturing to the tablet. "Participants engage in various scenarios, and I track how their responses change based on different variables." As they continued to chat, Maya couldn't help but marvel at how differently Jessie was treating her compared to their usual interactions as Reuben. There was an openness, a lack of the subtle competitiveness that often colored their exchanges. It was as if the dress had erected an entirely new social framework between them. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Mr. Kavanaugh, one of the science teachers serving as a judge. His eyebrows rose slightly as he approached, gaze sweeping over Maya and the project display. "Good morning," he said, consulting his clipboard. "You must be Maya?" "Yes, sir," Maya replied, smoothing her dress nervously. "Maya Garcia." Mr. Kavanaugh frowned, flipping through his papers. "I don't seem to have you on my list. Are you sure you're registered for the fair?" Maya's heart raced. This was an unexpected complication. I should be. I transferred recently, so Maybe there was a mix-up with the paperwork? The teacher's frown deepened. I see. Well, let's hear about your project while I sort this out. What are you presenting today? Taking a deep breath, Maya launched into her explanation once more, this time tailoring it for a more academic audience. She watched Mr. Kavanaugh's expression carefully, noting how his initial skepticism slowly gave way to genuine interest. That's quite an ambitious undertaking, he said when she finished. How did you come up with the idea? Maya hesitated, choosing her words carefully. I've always been fascinated by the way people present themselves to the world, and how that presentation affects their interactions. It's something I've experienced personally. Mr. Kavanaugh nodded, his gaze sharpening. I can imagine. And your methods? How are you ensuring the validity of your data? As Maya delved into the technical aspects of her research, she felt a growing sense of confidence. The questions were challenging, but fair, exactly what she would have expected as Reuben. It was clear that Mr. Kavanaugh was taking her seriously as a scientist, regardless of her appearance. Their discussion was interrupted by a commotion near the entrance. Maya looked up to see a group of students clustering around a new arrival. Her stomach dropped as she recognized the Letterman jacket of the school's star quarterback, Tyler Matthews. Tyler swaggered into the gym, his usual entourage in tow. His gaze swept the room, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. When his eyes landed on Maya, the smirk widened into a grin that sent a shiver down her spine. Well, well, Tyler drawled, sauntering over. What do we have here? Don't think I've seen you around before, sweetheart. Maya stiffened, acutely aware of Mr. Kavanaugh's presence. I'm new, she said curtly. Maya Garcia. Tyler leaned against the table, invading her personal space. Nice to meet you, Maya. I'm Tyler. I'd be happy to show you around sometime. Give you the grand tour. The suggestive tone made Maya's skin crawl. She'd seen Tyler interact with girls before, but experiencing it firsthand was entirely different. She forced a polite smile. Thanks, but I'm good. I'm pretty focused on my project right now. Oh, come on, Tyler pressed. All work and no play makes Maya a dull girl. Why don't you tell me about your little science thing here? Mr. Kavanaugh cleared his throat. Mr. Matthews, unless you're here to participate in the fair, I suggest you move along. We're in the middle of judging. Tyler straightened, his charm evaporating. Sure thing, Teach. Catch you later, Maya. As he sauntered away, Maya let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The interaction had been brief, but intensely illuminating. She made a mental note to include it in her data analysis later. Mr. Kavanaugh turned back to Maya, his expression sympathetic. I apologize for that interruption. Unfortunately, some students have difficulty maintaining appropriate behavior. Now, where were we? They resumed their discussion of Maya's methodology, but she found her attention divided. The encounter with Tyler had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. It wasn't just the discomfort of unwanted attention. It was the stark realization of how differently the world treated her as Maya compared to Reuben. As the morning wore on, Maya found herself constantly toggling between focusing on her project and acutely observing the social dynamics around her. She noticed how groups of girls huddled together, sneaking glances and whispering. Some approached her with friendly smiles, complimenting her outfit or asking about her project. Others kept their distance, eyeing her with what seemed like suspicion or even hostility. The boys, on the other hand, fell into two distinct camps. There were those who, like Tyler, saw her as a potential conquest. They swaggered up with practiced lines and cocky grins, each interaction leaving Maya feeling slightly grimy. Then, there were the ones who seemed almost afraid to approach her, stuttering and blushing when forced to interact. Through it all, Maya diligently recorded her observations and experiences. She conducted many interviews with willing participants, carefully noting the differences in how people responded to her questions compared to how they might have answered Ruben. As lunchtime approached, Maya found herself both exhilarated and exhausted. The constant performance, the hyper-awareness of every gesture and word, was taking its toll. She longed for a moment of respite, a chance to drop the act and process everything she'd learned. "Hey, Maya!" Jessie's voice cut through her thoughts. "A bunch of us are heading to the cafeteria for lunch. Want to join?" Maya hesitated. On one hand, this was a perfect opportunity to gather more data in a less structured environment. On the other, the thought of maintaining the charade through an entire meal was daunting. "Thanks, but I brought my own lunch," she said, gesturing vaguely toward her bag. "I want to review some of my notes while I eat." Jessie looked disappointed, but nodded. "Okay, no problem. Don't work too hard." As the gym emptied out, Maya sagged against her booth. She pulled out her phone, fingers hovering over the screen. Part of her wanted to text her best friend Alex for moral support. But what would she even say? "Hey, it's Ruben. I'm dressed as a girl for science and it's kind of freaking me out." Instead, she set an alarm for 20 minutes and closed her eyes, taking slow, deep breaths. The quiet of the nearly empty gym was a balm to her frayed nerves. For a moment, she allowed herself to simply exist. Neither Ruben nor Maya, just a person on the cusp of a profound realization. The peace was shattered by the sound of footsteps approaching. Maya's eyes snapped open to see Principal Hernandez striding towards her, a stern expression on his face. "Excuse me, young lady," he said, his tone clipped. "I need to see your student ID and fare registration." Maya's heart plummeted. This was the moment she'd been dreading, the one flaw in her otherwise meticulous plan. She swallowed hard, mind racing for a plausible excuse. I seem to have misplaced my ID," she stammered. "And there was some confusion with my registration because I'm new." Principal Hernandez's frown deepened. "New? I haven't approved any mid-semester transfers. What did you say your name was?" "Maya Garcia," she replied, the lie feeling heavier with each repetition. The principal's eyes narrowed. "Miss Garcia, I'm going to need you to come with me to the office. We'll sort this out there." Panic fluttered in Maya's chest. This was it. The experiment was about to come crashing down around her. She glanced at her project board, at the hours of work and preparation it represented. Then, with a deep breath, she made a decision. "Wait," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I can explain." Principal Hernandez crossed his arms, waiting expectantly. Maya squared her shoulders, channeling every ounce of confidence she could muster. "My name isn't really Maya Garcia. It's Ruben Patel. This is my project." The principal's eyebrows shot up, disbelief etched across his features. "Ruben? What on earth are you talking about?" "My project is about self-perception and social interaction." Maya, no, Ruben, explained, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I wanted to explore how people's behavior changes based on outward appearance, particularly in relation to gender presentation. So I decided to present as female for the fair, to collect real-time data on how people would treat me differently. Principal Hernandez's expression cycled through shock, confusion, and something that might have been grudging admiration. He pinched the bridge of his nose, sighing deeply.
"Reuben,"
he said finally, "while I can appreciate the creativity of your approach, this raises some serious ethical concerns. Deception in human subject research is a delicate matter." Reuben nodded, feeling a mix of relief and apprehension. At least the principal was engaging with the scientific aspect, rather than immediately shutting everything down.
"I understand, sir,"
Reuben replied. "I've actually prepared an ethical framework for the project, including plans for debriefing all participants and obtaining retroactive consent for data use. I'd be happy to go over it with you." Principal Hernandez seemed to war with himself for a moment, before nodding curtly.
"All right, let's see what you've got. But I want to be clear. This doesn't mean your project is approved. We'll need to discuss this with the science department and possibly the school board."
As Reuben walked the principal through his ethical considerations and data anonymization protocols, he felt a strange sense of lightness. The secret was out, at least to one person, and the world hadn't ended. In fact, explaining the project was helping him process the morning's experiences in a new light. Their discussion was interrupted by the return of students from lunch. Reuben quickly slipped back into the persona of Maya, acutely aware of the principal's scrutinizing gaze.
"We'll continue this conversation later,"
Principal Hernandez said quietly.
"For now, carry on with your data collection, but I expect a full report on my desk first thing Monday morning."
As the principal walked away, Reuben took a deep breath, smoothing down the front of his dress. The afternoon stretched before him, full of both promise and peril. He'd crossed a line, revealed his true self to one person. How many more revelations awaited? The science fair resumed its frenetic pace, with judges making their rounds and students eagerly explaining their projects. Reuben, still presenting as Maya, found himself fielding a steady stream of questions and interactions. Each one felt like a data point, a piece of a larger puzzle he was only beginning to understand. As the afternoon wore on, Reuben noticed a subtle shift in the atmosphere. Word had spread about the new girl and her intriguing project on identity and perception. More students were stopping by, curious to participate in the study. Some seemed genuinely interested in the science, while others appeared more interested in Maya herself. One such visitor was Emma Chen, captain of the debate team and known for her sharp intellect. She approached Maya's booth with a thoughtful expression, taking in the display with keen interest. "Fascinating premise," Emma said, skimming the project summary. "I'm curious about your methodology. How are you controlling for observer bias?" Reuben felt a surge of excitement. This was the kind of engagement he'd been hoping for, a chance to dive into the meat of his research.
"Great question,"
he replied, slipping easily into academic mode. "I'm using a multi-pronged approach." As they delved into a discussion of experimental design and data analysis, Reuben found himself forgetting the dress, the makeup, the performance. For a moment, he was simply a scientist, explaining his work to a peer. It was exhilarating. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the entrance. Reuben looked up to see a familiar figure storming into the gym, face flushed with anger. His stomach dropped. It was Alex, his best friend, and he looked furious. Alex scanned the room, his gaze locking onto Reuben with laser intensity. He marched over, ignoring the curious stares of other students.
"Where is he?"
Alex demanded, his voice tight with barely contained rage.
Where's Reuben?
Reuben froze, caught between the instinct to maintain his cover and the desire to calm his friend.
I'm sorry,
he said carefully, pitching his voice higher.
I don't know who you're talking about.
Alex's eyes narrowed, studying Maya's face intently. A flicker of recognition passed over his features, quickly replaced by shock and then hurt.
Reuben?
He whispered, disbelief coloring his tone.
What the hell, man?
The use of his real name sent a jolt through Reuben. He glanced around nervously, but Emma had drifted away, giving them privacy. Still, he couldn't risk breaking character completely.
I can explain,
he said softly, dropping the affected voice.
But not here, not now. Please, Alex. Trust me.
Alex shook his head, a mix of emotions playing across his face.
Trust you? You've been dodging my calls all day, and now I find you like this? What's going on, Reuben?
The genuine pain in Alex's voice cut deep. Reuben realized, with a pang of guilt, that in his focus on the experiment, he'd completely neglected to consider how his actions might affect his closest friend.
It's for my project,
Reuben explained hurriedly, keeping his voice low.
I'm studying how people's perceptions change based on appearance. I couldn't tell you because it would have compromised the data. I'm sorry, I should have what?
Alex interrupted, his anger giving way to confusion and hurt. Given me a heads up that my best friend was going to turn into a girl for a day? Jesus, Reuben! Reuben winced at the phrasing, but pressed on. I know it's weird, okay? But it's important. I'm learning so much, Alex. Not just for the project, but about myself. About how the world works. Please, just let me finish the fair. We can talk about everything after. I promise. Alex stared at him for a long moment, conflict evident in his eyes. Finally, he sighed, running a hand through his hair.
Fine, but we are definitely talking about this later, and you owe me big time for covering for you with your parents.
Relief washed over Reuben.
Thank you,
he said sincerely.
I'll explain everything. I swear.
As Alex walked away, shaking his head, Reuben felt a complex mix of emotions. Guilt at having worried his friend, relief at not being fully exposed, and a growing sense of unease about the conversations that lay ahead. He was so lost in thought that he almost missed the approach of the next group of judges. Scrambling to compose himself, Reuben smoothed down his dress and plastered on a smile.
The show, as they say, must go on.
The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of presentations, questions, and covert data collection. Reuben found himself constantly toggling between the persona of Maya and his own scientific mindset, analyzing each interaction even as he participated in it. As the fair began to wind down, Reuben felt a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. He'd gathered more data than he'd dared hope for, and the insights were already beginning to coalesce into patterns that both excited and unsettled him. The final judging panel approached, led by Dr. Simmons, the head of the science department. Reuben straightened, preparing for what he knew would be the most rigorous questioning yet.
Good afternoon,
Dr. Simmons said, her keen eyes taking in the display.
Maya Garcia, correct? I've heard quite a bit about your project. Why don't you walk us through it?
Reuben launched into his explanation, carefully gauging the reactions of Dr. Simmons and her fellow judges. He could see the moment when understanding dawned in the teacher's eyes, a flicker of recognition quickly masked by professional interest. As he delved into the methodology and preliminary findings, Ruben found himself speaking with a passion that surprised even him. This wasn't just about winning the fair anymore. It was about sharing a profound, personal, and scientific journey. "Fascinating work," Dr. Simmons said when he finished. "I'm particularly interested in how you've integrated real-time data collection with more traditional survey methods. Have you considered the potential long-term applications of this research?" The question caught Ruben off guard. He'd been so focused on the immediate experiment that he hadn't given much thought to its broader implications. But as he began to answer, ideas started flowing. "Well," he said, warming to the topic, "I think this kind of research could have significant applications in fields like sociology, psychology, and even public policy. Understanding how appearance and identity affect social interactions could inform everything from anti-discrimination measures to public health initiatives." Dr. Simmons nodded approvingly. "Excellent. And on a more personal level, how has this experience affected your own understanding of identity and perception?" The question hit close to home. Ruben paused, considering his words carefully. "It's been enlightening," he said finally. "I've always been interested in how people construct and present their identities, but experiencing it firsthand has been eye-opening. I've realized how much of our social reality is based on assumptions and unspoken rules about appearance and behavior." He took a deep breath, deciding to push a little further. "To be honest, this project has made me question a lot of things about myself and how I interact with the world. It's been challenging, but also incredibly freeing in a way I didn't expect." Dr. Simmons studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she smiled, a glimmer of understanding in her eyes. "Thank you, Maya. Or should I say, Ruben. Your project is not only scientifically rigorous, but also deeply personal and socially relevant. I look forward to seeing your final report." As the judges moved on, Ruben felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Dr. Simmons had seen through his disguise, but instead of exposing him, she'd engaged with the substance of his work. It felt like a validation not just of his project, but of the personal journey it represented. The rest of the fair passed in a haze of final presentations and cleanup. As students began to file out, Ruben lingered at his booth, reluctant to let go of Maya just yet. He'd experienced an entire lifetime in the span of a day, and the thought of simply changing back into his regular clothes and resuming his old life felt impossible. A hand on his shoulder startled him out of his reverie. He turned to find Alex standing there, his expression a mix of concern and curiosity. "Hey," Alex said softly. "You ready to go?" Ruben nodded, suddenly overwhelmed by the enormity of what he'd done and what lay ahead. "Yeah, I just need to grab my things." As they walked out of the gym together, Ruben in his floral dress and Alex in his usual jeans and t-shirt, the contrast between them felt both stark and oddly fitting. They were silent as they made their way to Alex's car, each lost in their own thoughts. Once inside, away from prying eyes, Alex turned to his friend. "So," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "Want to tell me what this was all about?" Ruben took a deep breath, feeling the weight of Maya's persona begin to slip away. "It's a long story," he said, "but I think I'm ready to tell it." Thanks for watching, my girlies! Be sure to check out Patreon for more!